Hello students, today we will discuss some of the important questions from your lesson, A Triumph of Surgery. The questions which are generally asked in the examination, the first of those are actually how did Mr. Pumphrey, sorry, this is Mrs. Pumphrey, you will note down in the copy Mrs. Pumphrey, not Mr. Pumphrey. So actually, how did Mrs. Humphrey and her servant behave when Tricky was being sent to the surgery? In the story, you saw that students, when that Tricky was sent to the surgery, everyone was so panicked and they were so scared. And at the Mrs. Humphrey's house, all his staff and servants, and especially Mrs. Humphrey, became so emotional, and they were thinking that they might not see Pumphrey, they might not see Tricky again. So, to answer this question, you will write in this way: the entire staff was roused. Roused means, they all were got up and they all start arranging things for Tricky. Mates rushed in and out, bringing his day bed, night bed, cushion, toys. You all have seen this in the story, students. So, I hope you can write all these things quite easily. Everybody was in tears. Mrs. Pumphrey gave a desperate cry when Tricky was sent to surgery. So actually, this was the answer that you would write, and it's the same way that has been mentioned in the story. So and in all the answers, I generally say that answers are actually the sample answers that teacher give. You have to attempt yourselves, but these are the answers that you look for an idea how should you write. Now let's discuss another question. The second question: why did Mrs. Humphrey make a frantic call to Mrs. Harriet? Student, frantic call means to say that call in hurriedness. She just called at once, a sudden call, without thinking a lot, because she was panicked that Tricky is seriously and severely ill. Or what was Tricky's ailment? How did it worry Mrs. Pumphrey? Actually, what was the Tricky's problem and why Mrs. Pumphrey was worried for that? So, in the answer of this question, you would write Mrs. Pumphrey had a dog named Tricky. Indirectly, she was responsible for the dog's illness. In the story, students, you have seen that it was actually because of the Mrs. Pumphrey's excessive love and care, and the pamper that she gave to Tricky. That was the actually she pampered him a lot, and that is the main reason why Tricky got so sick. So that is why you would write here that she was actually responsible for the dog's illness. She gave him little extra between meals. For example, as you have seen in the story, malt, cod liver, oil, etc. I have actually made you saw also all these things. He was not given any physical exercise, so the dog fell ill and started vomiting also. It made Mrs. Pumphrey so much worried that she had to call the veterinary surgeon, Dr. Harriot, for his treatment. So actually, students, these are these and in this is the best way to write the answer I have written for all of you. Now discuss the third question: why was Dr. Harriot but you can also write in a great way. In answers, there's nothing that there's not like that this is the correct answer and that's not the correct answer. In literature, there is nothing like that. Every person likes in their own way, but you should mention the things that has been mentioned in the story. So now just think here, why was Dr. Harriot confident that Tricky will be in hospital soon? In the beginning you saw that Dr. Harriot, after seeing Tricky, was very worried. He knew that Tricky will have to be hospitalized sooner rather than later because of his condition, because he grew excessive fat, and and he wasn't doing any sort of physical activity or exercise. So in the answer you would write here, Dr. Harriot was shocked to see Tricky's condition. He knew that the latter would soon be hospitalized, as he was unable to move. He had become hugely fat, like a bloated sausage. In the story, you have seen this, and his tongue lolled from his jaws. So, these are the reasons for which Mr. Harriot was quite confident that sooner rather than later, Tricky would be hospitalized. How would you describe the behavior of the rich woman, Mrs. Pumphrey's pampering and overfeeding Tricky? Now you saw in the story that all the problems with the Tricky started just because of the behavior of Mrs. Pumphrey, just because of the Mrs. Pumphrey's behavior and the extra pampering that she does with the Tricky. Sometime anything, students, the life is about balancing things. Anything over or more than need, can cause problem for everyone. That's what has been shown in the story. So actually, Mrs. Pumphrey behaved in a very silly and thoughtless manner by over pampering Tricky. Actually, she loves Tricky that more than need. She over pampers her, and that is actually the real problem. You will have to think that someone whom you love, someone whom you care, you should have also, you must have also the sense to judge what is right or what is wrong for him, her. What is good to do with the person whom you love, and what is not good to do with the person that you love. So actually, Mrs. Humphrey here is totally wrong when she gives the dog so many things to eat and drink, and especially the wine, alcoholic things, such as brandy. These are really not good at all. Indirectly, she was responsible for his health, for his ill health. It was totally a waste of money, but this behavior is very common among rich people. It is a general problem of those who live alone. Actually, in a way, you can correlate this with those people also who are very rich. Sometimes they do the things which are actually not needed to do. So, you can see the same thing in this story as well. Now let's discuss the next question that can be asked in the examination, such as what suggestions were given by Dr. Harriot to Mrs. Pumphrey at the initial stage. In the initial stage, and it means in the beginning of the story, at the beginning, you saw that Dr. Harriot actually asked Mrs. Pumphrey to give a lot of exercise, or let the dog do many physical activities. So Dr. Harriot suggested Mrs. Pumphrey to cut down on the sweet things. In the story, you saw that he told Mrs. Pumphrey that you have to cut down the sweet things. There's so many sweet things that the dog eat, and in the story, he also said that Tricky was a kind of dog who never refused when it comes to eating, and not to give extra food to him. He also suggested her to give him more exercise and keep him on a very strict diet. So it's all about exercising. Our body remains fit as much we walk, or as much we stretch it. Our strength or our boundaries become stretch by actually stretching our limit. So students, today we have discussed on some of the questions that are important for the examination. Let's discuss one more question before we will discuss on the long answer questions. Why was Mr. Harriot tempted to keep Tricky as a permanent guest? In the story, you saw that at the surgery, Mr. Harriot and all his partner wanted the Tricky to be to keep him as a permanent guest, because of the Tricky, they all were able to eat so many things. The good things. They were able to eat eggs. They were able to drink wine and brandy, etc. So they were very happy when while the time Tricky was with them. So they wanted to have him as a permanent guest. So Mrs. Pumphrey used to send lots of things like eggs, wine, brandy, etc. for Tricky, but nothing was given to Tricky. All the things were actually consumed by the doctor and the other members of the hospital. You saw that. Hence, Mr. Harriot was tempted to keep Tricky as his permanent guest. So we will write this, student. I will attach the PDF file also, and then we will see the long answer questions tomorrow.